So welcome. Thank you for joining us for this webinar and discussion titled Breaking the Silence, Establishing New Intergenerational Communication Norms for Family Planning and Sexual and Reproductive Health. My name is Sanyukta Mathur. I'm a Senior Technical Advisor on Gender and Youth for Breakthrough Research. And I'm happy to be joined by a wonderful group of presenters and panelists today to launch this discussion. We're going to have a really stimulating hour where we can talk about intergenerational communication and social norms around family planning and sexual and reproductive health, and its implications for social and behavior change programming. Intergenerational communication, as I think most everybody on this webinar will know, is really broadly referring to interactions between individuals from different age groups or age cohorts. I am personally very excited for this webinar as my work on adolescent sexual and reproductive health was shaped by a very early project in Nepal that explored the differences between youth aspirations for their lives and adults' perceptions of youth opportunities, and understanding some of the disjunctures between those aspirations and realities could really helped us lead to a more positive programmatic action to help young people fulfill these aspirations. So today, we hope to move our collective understanding forward on intergenerational communication about FPRH and ways in which young people, particularly those in Francophone West Africa, can be supported and encouraged in leading a healthy lifestyle. We will be hearing highlights from 3 social and behavior change projects, followed by a panel discussion, and then we will open up for some Q&A. So first, we will hear from Dr. Martha Silva. She's an assistant professor at Tulane University School of Public Health in the Department of International Health and Sustainable Development. She's also the data strategist and innovation team lead for Breakthrough Research. The title of her presentation is called Changing the Script, Intergenerational Communication about SRH in Niger. And we'll be hearing highlights about participants' beliefs, values, and perceived social norms related to FPRH and implications for SBC programming. Next, we will hear from Dr. Clement Nyansaba. He's a senior technical advisor who serves as FHI 360's country representative in their Bujumbura, Burundi office. Dr. Nyansaba is a Burundian physician with a master's degree in public health and has more than 20 years of experience in design and implementation of health projects and coordination with implementing partners with FHI 360 and others. His title is his presentation, which will be pre-recorded video. He's on the call though to answer questions, is recognizing the spectrum of normative influence for SRH communication in Burundi. This was work done as part of the Passages Project, a formative study to explore social norms related to SRH knowledge and behavior among adolescent girls and young women. And the findings will highlight descriptive and injunctive norms related to SRH communication and important and complex roles of influence group in upholding these norms. And finally, we are going to end with a video from Dr. Cyprien Zinsou. He's the head of research and monitoring and evaluation at ABMS in Benin. He has extensive experience in qualitative and quantitative research across a range of health areas and is published in areas such as malaria and FPRH. We're going to be hearing from him about opening up conversations between mothers and daughters in Benin. The ABMS and PSI team are going to be sharing findings from a qualitative study that explored attitudes and perceptions around FPRH after including mothers in educational talks as part of an intervention called Artisanal Academy Intervention in Benin. These findings will highlight changes in knowledge and perceptions around SRH by both mothers and daughters, as well as the potential role for mothers in creating an enabling environment for SRH programming. So welcome again to all of our presenters, panelists, and attendees. And with this, let me pass to Dr. Martha Silva. Martha?
Thank you, Sanyukta. Just wanting to check that you can hear me because I have switched my headphones. Just a quick yes or no before I continue.
We can hear you.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Thank you. Good morning. Good afternoon. I am Dr. Martha Silva, Tulane University, but today I'm presenting on behalf of a group of colleagues, both from the Population Council and also from SARA Group, which is a group of professionals in Togo, Niger, and Cote d'Ivoire. So really presenting on behalf of a much larger group. Slide, please. I will actually turn off my video just to make sure that we can preserve bandwidth for everyone involved. Thank you. So comparatively speaking, there is still little research coming from francophone West Africa about intergenerational communication around FP-SRH. But research from other regions of the world have shown us that open and supportive communication between adults and young people around these topics motivates adolescents and young people to internalize the values and norms rooted in their parents' message or other significant adults. And that consequently can influence adolescent sexual behavior and decision-making. We also know that parent and young people communication involves a complex dynamic. It needs knowledge, it needs skills, self-efficacy to communicate, but also an environment that is conducive for open discussion. We also understand that cultural and religious taboos are part of the normative environment that can further restrict these topics discussed. And despite knowing what we know, we don't have a lot of context that is specific to contexts such as Niger. And so we wanted to conduct this research specifically in Niger. And so what I will be presenting to you today is the following research question that guided this analysis, and it centers around the facilitating factors and the barriers for intergenerational communication. Next slide. So in order to do this, we wanted to ensure we were able to talk to two types of participants. So we wanted to talk to those who were already engaging in open intergenerational communication about family planning, sexual reproductive health, and those who were not. So this study took a two-stage approach. The objective of stage one was to develop a screening tool to categorize research participants by this communication type. So practicing open intergenerational communication or not. And then the stage two of the research consisted in 40 individual in-depth interviews, and we wanted to stratify interviewees by age, sex, and communication status. So among young people, talking to both male and female participants, and within that, those who engage in open intergenerational communication and those who do not, and the same for adults. And then following this, we conducted thematic content analysis with the researchers in both the US, Niger, Togo, and Cote d'Ivoire. Next slide. Study participants report that most or all members of their community only find sexual activity acceptable within the context of marriage, regardless of the age of those involved. The sanctions to transgressing this norm go beyond the loss of respect within the community, which was the sanction that was most commonly cited or surfaced in the data. Yet for some, the sanctions really continue beyond in the afterlife. So following this norm about sexual activity among young people, we find that family planning access is perceived as it should be restricted to married people. And once again, from participants' perspectives, if young people should not be having sex outside of marriage, there is no reason for which they should be accessing family planning methods or services. Despite the generalized agreement about these two restrictive social norms, participants who practice open intergenerational communication had a different narrative. Some respondents felt that unmarried youth who are sexually active should be allowed to access family planning information and services. So abstinence from sexual activity is the best and most virtuous option. Yet when abstinence is not attainable, the next best option is protection from unwanted health outcomes. And so according to this particular subgroup of participants, parents agree that sending their daughters to a health center was an act of responsibility. So moving beyond the description of norms, we wanted to take a look at how expressed social values were used as part of participants' narratives, and particularly the narratives that they were conveying, justifying intergenerational communication. Protecting youth was expressed universally as a societal priority that underpinned participants' actions. So both participants that were communicators and those who were non-communicators, who were not practicing intergenerational communication, were motivated by the value of protecting youth. So among those who communicate openly with young people or intergenerational communication, the communication aims to make young people aware of the dangers of sexual relations, while those who do not communicate claim that they are also protecting young people by remaining silent. Safeguarding social values, social tradition came out strongly in participants' narratives. So for these participants who were open communicators, it was really important to communicate discreetly, but openly about sexuality and sexual and reproductive health with young people. And emphasizing religious values helps to avoid shame and humiliation of both the family as a unit, but also the dignity of the young person. And so in this, what came out was respect for tradition. The third emerging value that manifested differently within the study participants was the promotion of well-being. So the participants who were engaging in intergenerational communication about sexual health topics thought that communication contributed to improving well-being, not only for the young people, but also for society as a whole. Next slide. So moving on to the discussion and putting all of this together, the results of this study show that even in an environment that is unfavorable to intergenerational communication, adults who engage in this behavior recognize that communication about topics such as family planning and reproductive health with unmarried youth is protective, and they use widely accepted social values to justify talking openly with young people, even if they have to do so discreetly to avoid social sanctions. So adult participants in this study are implicitly embracing a risk reduction strategy that is commonly used in public health. They're implicitly adopting this as they justify and decide engaging in this communication. Participants who are not open communicators, those who are not engaging in intergenerational communication, we find that they hold the same social values as those who are open communicators, but they do not see the link between upholding these values and talking to young people to reduce the negative health outcomes. Thank you. I will leave the presentation here and look forward to the discussion.
C'est un plaisir pour moi d'être avec vous et d'avoir une opportunité de présenter les résultats d'une étude menée ici au Burundi dans le cadre d'un projet Passage. Le projet Passage est un accord de coopération de 7 ans financé par l'USAID et qui a été exécuté par l'Institut pour la santé reproductive de l'Université Georgetown. Cette étude a été menée par FHI en collaboration avec le Programme national de santé de reproduction du ministère burundais de la Santé publique et qui visait l'exploration des normes sociales liées à la santé sexuelle et reproductive et à la planification familiale chez les célibataires, adolescentes et jeunes filles au Burundi. L'étude Passage au Burundi était une étude descriptive exploratoire avec 2 objectifs principaux, à savoir explorer les normes sociales liées aux connaissances et comportements en matière de SSR et des adolescents et jeunes filles célibataires au Burundi, identifier les individus et les groupes pertinents qui influencent et appliquent les normes sociales. Dans cette étude, nous avons mené 12 discussions de groupe avec des adolescentes et jeunes filles âgées de 15 ans à 19 ans et 18 discussions de groupe avec des groupes d'individus identifiés par les adolescentes comme les influençant dans 4 domaines d'enquête, à savoir la fécondité et la planification familiale volontaire, la gestion de la menstruation et l'hygiène menstruelle, les comportements sexuels à risque et la violence sexuelle. Pour obtenir une diversité géographique et urbaine, l'étude a été menée dans 4 provinces, à savoir Bujumbura-Mairie, Gitega, Bururi et Muyinga, comme c'est présenté sur l'orographique. Dans chaque province, nous avons d'abord mené des discussions de groupe avec des adolescentes et jeunes filles pour chaque domaine d'enquête sur la planification familiale et SSR. Nous avons demandé aussi quels comportements sont typiques chez les adolescents, jeunes filles, dans leur communauté, lesquels de ces comportements sont socialement approuvés et désapprouvés, et quel type de personnes, de groupes influencent le plus ces comportements. Nous avons ensuite recruté des groupes de personnes que les adolescentes et jeunes filles ont signalés comme influenceurs avec 6 types de groupes d'influence. Les mères des adolescentes, les prestataires de soins, les agents de santé communautaire, les membres des clubs de santé, les enseignants, les dirigeants locaux, ici, c'est les administratifs et les leaders religieux. En utilisant nos critères analytiques, 8 normes sociales ont émergé comme ayant la plus grande influence sur le comportement et les 4 domaines d'enquête étaient transversales autour d'une norme de communication sur la PF-SSR. La norme de communication sur la PF-SSR que nous avons identifiée avait à la fois une composante descriptive et une composante injonctive. La norme injonctive, c'est ce que les participants percevaient que les autres faisaient n'était pas de discuter ouvertement des problèmes sur la PF-SSR. La norme injonctive, c'est ce que les participants percevaient comme un comportement approuvé pour adolescentes et jeunes filles, était qui n'est pas considéré comme socialement acceptable et discuter ouvertement des questions de sexualité et de santé reproductive. Nous présentons les 3 citations des participants à l'étude qui identifient et décrivent cette norme, en particulier à ce qui concerne la façon dont elle se déroule au sein des ménages et des familles. En haut, c'est un agent de santé communautaire de Muyinga qui a déclaré: en général, dans notre culture burundaise, les participants ont honte de discuter avec les enfants de ce qui concerne les parties génitales et ce que les menstruations passent par les parties intimes sur lesquelles les Burundais ont honte de discuter. De même, un enseignant de Kitega a déclaré ceci: les parents ne peuvent pas communiquer avec leurs enfants car ils considèrent le sujet de la sexualité comme un sujet tabou. C'est pourquoi la fille a peur de communiquer avec sa mère. Un autre enseignant de Muyinga a déclaré ceci: à cause des normes sociales, les parents pensent qu'en parlant avec leurs enfants, ils seront en train de dire de mauvaises choses. C'est pourquoi les enfants de 13 ans à 14 ans, la menstruation leur arrive par surprise. En termes d'influenceurs clés de ces normes sociales, nous avons identifié que l'influence de ces groupes exerçant sur les adolescents et jeunes filles. Dans cet extrait, nous nous concentrerons spécifiquement sur ce que les participants nous ont dit sur l'influence des mères et vous pouvez voir qu'elles ont été notées comme ayant une influence sur les 4 domaines d'enquête et surtout sur le spectre d'influence, c'est-à-dire de très favorable à très contraignant. Et la façon dont ils ont eu la plus grande influence était par la communication en parlant à leurs filles. Brièvement, au Burundi, comme potentiellement dans d'autres pays, les grandes conclusions de cette recherche et les implications pour le changement de comportement social et les programmes de PF et de SSS de l'adolescente sont les suivants. Le manque de communication ouverte sur la santé sexuelle et reproductive est normatif, ce qui a des effets d'entraînement sur les connaissances et la prise de décision sexuelle des adolescentes et jeunes filles. Une grande variété de types d'individus avec une grande variété d'influences. L'adolescente jeune fille était censée se conformer aux normes et encourir des sanctions en cas de non-conformité, mais qu'elles manquaient d'informations et de capacités de soutien pour changer les normes par elles-mêmes. Pris ensemble, ces résultats signalent un besoin urgent de briser le silence autour de la communication sur la santé sexuelle et reproductive de l'adolescent et jeune fille, mais aussi cibler l'adolescent seul ne permettra pas d'obtenir de changement de comportement social souhaité. Merci pour votre aimable attention.
Chez les femmes au Bénin en général, faible, elle est encore plus faible chez les adolescents et jeunes filles de 15 à 24 ans non mariées. Et 30% des filles ont déjà eu au moins un enfant à 19 ans, selon l'EDS de 2017. Et chaque année, des centaines d'adolescents abandonnent leur scolarité. Ces filles déscolarisées et les non scolarisées sont désœuvrées, démunies, commencent très tôt leur vie sexuelle. Dans ce contexte, en 2017, l'ABMS, avec l'appui institutionnel de PSI et l'appui technique de LDO sur financement de l'USAID, a identifié puis testé l'Académie de l'artisanat comme projet pertinent à l'issue d'une étude de Human Centered Design. L'Académie de l'artisanat cible les adolescents et jeunes filles non scolarisées ou déscolarisées et non mariées âgées de 15 à 24 ans. 2 personnes essentiellement l'animent. Il s'agit d'une formatrice à la fabrication des objets fantaisie à l'aide de pelles ou de tissus et d'une animatrice communautaire qui enseigne les leçons de santé. Un agent de santé de proximité est disponible pour offrir des conseils aux services de santé reproductive. Pour accompagner les filles à la maison, leurs mères tutrices sont invitées à prendre part à des séances de discussion des mères 2 fois par mois. Une étude a été réalisée à la fin du projet en octobre 2019. Les activités ayant été menées entre avril et septembre 2019. Donc, un mois plus tard, une étude a été réalisée pour voir les perceptions des activités de l'Académie de l'artisanat par les personnes impliquées dans les communes d'intervention. On a interrogé des filles, des mères, des garçons. 220 filles ont été interrogées pour le volet quantitatif et pour le volet qualitatif. 32 mères ou tutrices à raison de 8 par commune ont été interviewées. Nous avons remarqué que pendant les 4 mois, au moins 125 mères ont pris part au moins une fois aux séances bimensuelles des mères. Le pourcentage des filles qui déclarent avoir discuté des questions de socialité avec leur mère ou tutrice a évolué significativement de 59% à 91%. Écoutons 2 mères. La première de Boycon nous dit, ce qui m'a le plus plu, ce sont les enseignements sur la sexualité. Comment faire pour ne pas attraper des grossesses non désirées. La seconde mère dit, on leur a appris l'hygiène corporelle et aussi une activité générative de revenus, ce qui est très important. Quelles sont les leçons apprises? Essentiellement 2. Premièrement, les mères ont été impactées positivement. Elles affirment avoir reçu des astuces pour une bonne éducation des filles. Les enseignements que j'ai reçus à la séance des mères étaient très bien. J'ai appris comment bien éduquer et m'entendre avec elles. Mère de 39 ans de Boycon. La seconde nous dit, ces discussions m'ont permis de savoir attirer ma fille, savoir discuter avec ma fille. On se comprend mieux aujourd'hui dans le ménage. Je lui donne des conseils pour mieux vivre sa sexualité. La seconde leçon, après, c'est la motivation des mères. Elles étaient très motivées et en majorité, elles donnaient de l'argent aux filles pour fréquenter non seulement l'activité, mais aller dans les formations sanitaires pour aller recevoir des conseils de l'agent de santé ou aux besoins des services. Bien entendu, certaines étaient catégoriques pour ne pas laisser leurs filles recevoir des méthodes car pour elles, la PF a des inconvénients. qui est destiné non pas pour les jeunes, mais pour celles qui ont déjà fait l'expérience de la maternité. Voilà globalement l'expérience que je voulais vous partager avec l'implication des mères dans l'Académie de l'artisanat. Merci pour votre attention.
Great, thank you. And thank you for bearing with us. It's always both, I think, rewarding as well as challenging to do the simultaneous translations. Thank you to our interpreter who's on the line and trying to keep up with us. As Sherry has noted in the chat, the slides and recordings will be shared afterwards. And we do encourage you to post your questions in the Q&A tab because what we want to do for the remainder of our time together is really start off with a panel discussion and open it up to broader questions from all the participants. In addition to our presenters, I'd like to also invite Dr. Elizabeth Kostenbender, a senior social and behavioral scientist and the Global Health Population and Nutrition Division at FHI 360 to join us for our panel discussion. Betsy has led and collaborated on and led research and intervention project among populations at risk of poor sexual and reproductive health outcomes in resource-limited settings for more than a decade. She's particularly focused on understanding the social context of risk and the role of norms and networks. So welcome, and if our panelists are able to turn on their video, we would welcome that if bandwidth allows. I think participants may like to see you. But let me start with a first question that I think and maybe I can put it to each of the presenters, which is around we talked, I think many of your presentations spoke about parents, a few had other adults as well. If you could speak a little more to how other adults, other than parents, sort of fit in this picture around intergenerational communication. How do we go beyond parental figures? Martha, maybe I can pass to you first, and then we'd love to hear from Cyprian, Clement, and anybody else on the panel.
Yes, thank you, Sanyukta. So in our study, adult participants, regardless of whether they were categorized as open communicators or those who were not, there was a pretty generalized belief that it is the responsibility of religious men, those who are knowledgeable about religious principles, to communicate with young people about family planning and sexual and reproductive health. So that was the number one kind of response that we got that was pretty generalized. They were expressing that the subject of sexuality is best addressed by preachers in a specifically religious framework, such as wedding ceremonies or preaching sessions. And then after that, there were mentions of teachers, other family members, such as uncles and aunts. But there was a pretty clear division. Those people who were not practicing intergenerational communication definitely thought that parents were not the prime person to do that.
Thanks, Martha. That's very interesting. Clement or Cyprian, would you like to add anything to that? And again, the question was around other adults, other key adults that play a role in intergenerational communication around family planning and sexual and reproductive health.
Sure, I can jump in.
Yes, thank you. In Benin, when we worked in the Academy of Craft, there are other people from other localities, so as chiefs of villages that came to visit the girls, to encourage them to participate to this program. So we had a chief of a village who came to a youth meeting and said, I wish you good luck for your project, and I encourage everyone to participate and exchange, and I offer you a big room to conduct your meetings. This is very important. So premises, and we had also somebody who brought a girl that was living in very far away from the location of the meeting on a bike, because her parents couldn't bring her to these meetings, and this is very encouraging. So these efforts done by the community to make to encourage these girls to ameliorate their reproductive health. So these are examples that I can give that motivated the girls to participate in these meetings. So these are individual initiatives. Thank you.
Great. Very interesting. And I could jump in here quickly in terms of the FHI study to say that, as Clement showed in his presentation, participants named a large array of different influence groups who influenced the reproductive health and family planning behaviors of the adolescent girls and young women. And though there were some distinctions between the groups who influenced issues of fertility, family planning, and menstruation from those who influenced, sexual debut, risk behavior, and violence, many of these influence groups influenced multiple domains. And I think we thought of them as kind of almost at 3 different levels of a social ecological model in terms of the way that they interacted with and communicated with the girls, right? So at that household level or family level, it was mostly the mothers who really emerged as a huge influence group, and also aunts. So there's a lot of interpersonal communication approaches needed there. And then we also found that like teachers and health workers were also named very frequently, and a lot of the interaction there was around counseling skills. And then, but then, finally other groups in the community, such as religious leaders and local administrators, were discussed as having little direct interaction with adolescent girls and young women, but having exerting a significant influence on the overall messaging and normative environment for family planning and sexual reproductive health. So for instance, in our focus group discussions, religious leaders were often mentioned as key influencers of family planning, and as much as religious teachings on contraception and family size influence the normative environment, and religious institutions seem to play a central role in communities. So important there to engage with those groups, as advocates for new positive communication norms.
Thank you, Betsy and Cyprian and Martha. I think one thing that all 3 of you have started touching on, and I'd like to hear a little more about, is some of the elements that facilitated some of the intergenerational communication. So what are the either programmatic or from your research for our SBC colleagues who are on the call when they want to create this space? What are the elements that they should be thinking about? Cyprian, would you like to start? And I forgot to note that we also have Beth Brocard on the call. She's with PSI. She's a regional project director. Sorry, let me for Francophone in West Africa, and was the COP for the Transform Fair project that was presented. So Beth or Cyprian, if you'd like to start.
So I didn't understand the question very well. Can you please repeat the question?
Yes, of course. Sorry about that. I think what we would love to hear a little bit more.
Can you please repeat the question?
Yes. The question is, what are some of the key elements that facilitated intergenerational communication in your program, for instance, between mothers and daughters? And I pose it to you, Cyprian. Yeah, thank you.
So in our program, we had to take the mothers apart from the daughters, and we discussed with them from about certain terms, their perception about certain concepts, and we discussed about themes to ameliorate their knowledge in order to make them capable to discuss certain subjects with their daughter. And this allowed these women to develop their skills, communication skills about these subjects. And it was an opportunity for us to give the right information to these women. And the second part is that in order to mobilize the young girls, we try to work with public authorities, and we visited girls at their home in order to understand the problems of communication that we have on the field, on the real field, and to know more in details the difficulties encountered by these girls and parents to communicate about these subjects. And the relationships were ameliorated relatively thanks to our intervention. Thank you.
We can't speak to this from an implementation perspective. But in my presentation, I mentioned very briefly how participants who were practicing open intergenerational communication rely heavily on the three social values that I presented, that I described: protecting youth, respect for tradition, and promoting well-being. They rely heavily on these values as justification for doing something that is counter-normative. So talking to people, even though the generalized agreement is that the social norm is against that. People that were not communicating with young people, or people who were not engaging in intergenerational communication, were still expressing similar values, but what they were, what was different was the framing. The framing, they were expressing that not talking to young people, for example, was a way of protecting them. And so I think that what is very interesting in our case is to look at how adults who are engaging in open intergenerational communication and those who are not are using different framings, but based on the same social values. So I think that's something that it's really interesting to highlight.
Thank you, Martha, which actually leads me to the next question I had for the panelists, and you started touching on this. And so I would love to hear, were there any unexpected results in the research and programming that you could share with our audience? And I open that up to any of the panelists.
Oui, au Benin, par exemple.
So in Benin, for example, our program of the Academy of Handcraft, so work with girls and count on girls. We wanted them to ameliorate their knowledge about certain subjects and to have the possibility to access to counseling or services or that are offered to these girls in terms of contraception. For example, I was very surprised about how mothers that were a little bit afraid from this new program, but they have understood what we have been saying about contraception and integrated those information with an open mind and ameliorated their knowledge and adopted certain behaviors. And we have a lot of testimonies attesting that. So the other surprising result that was not expected in the beginning are the fathers. The fathers were also afraid to participate to sessions speaking about contraceptions, but when they participated and they attended, they have seen amelioration of their knowledge and their attitude towards these subjects. And the girls have seen their fathers change their behavior, and the general ambience of the household was ameliorated, and they could be more direct and more communicative with each other. These are the two big surprising results that I might that I can mention in here that were encountered during our program. I would like to add that with the study that we had in Burundi, we observed that it's not enough to target the adolescents and young girls, but we have seen that to have a positive, concrete impact on the population and the family planification, it is important to address the questions that are linked especially to the key influencers that were mentioned in our study, because the behavioral change doesn't count only on young girls, but also on the elaboration of programs that allow to the communication between the key influencers of the community and the adolescents in order to have the same understanding and I think it is important to take that into consideration in developing or designing any program that is aiming to make any behavioral change in that sense. We need to also emphasize more and do more efforts in spreading and disseminating the right informations among these populations.
I guess, between men and women, adult men and women, related to the sense of shame that comes with discussing topics of sexual health in Niger. So we were definitely expecting both shame and fear to appear as kind of predominant sentiments within this context of intergenerational communication. But what we found is that even among adult men, being perceived as knowledgeable about sex is shameful too. And so in my expectation and my own biases, I was expecting to see a little bit more of a difference. And so to me, that was very illuminating in terms of needing to address fear and shame itself in a much more generalized way than I had previously thought.
Thank you. Those are really fascinating insights. And Martha, I too am surprised about the gender difference there. I would like to open up spend the rest of the time on some questions that have come in from our participants on this webinar. Really great questions. Martha, there's a number of questions around your research approach and methodology. Participants would like to know if the respondents came from the same community or had the same socioeconomic background, who was interviewed. And so if you can give just a brief overview on that, or maybe refer them to materials, that would be great.
Yes, unfortunately, I don't have a brief yet ready to refer you to, but just to quickly, I do notice that I neglected to say that this study was actually taking place in Niamey. So it was all in the capital city, which is quite significant when you're talking about the social norms and normative environments. And so I don't have the information on hand in terms of socioeconomic status. We did not collect more like a quantitative measure, but the participants are coming from the same geographic location. And so it is an urban sample. So that's very important to note. And then in terms of methodology, Sanyukta, did you say there was something in particular? This was obviously a qualitative approach, but given that we wanted to ensure a variety of responses, we took this segmented approach of talking to both adults and young people, both male and female, but also both exhibiting already open communication, intergenerational communication and not. So it was a segmented sampling strategy.
Great, thanks, Martha. This next question, and I think I'll pose this first to the PSI team, is around sustainability mechanisms. So what sustainability mechanisms were put in place to ensure the intergenerational communication sort of sustained past the project implementation period? This is a challenge, I think, of all projects thinking about sustainability. So we would love to hear from the PSI team, please.
Oui, c'est vraiment.
So we've been working during 4 months, and we worked in collaboration with mothers and girls, and we think it is very important, and it has been very important in our program. And unfortunately, we don't have more means to go more in depth and to make it sustainable, but we wanted to start a collaboration between the mothers and their daughters, and we hope to make it continue. But unfortunately, we don't have more resources to make to implement mechanisms that will make this more sustainable in time.
Well noted, Cyprian. That is often a challenge when we have some innovative work and are unable to continue it. There's another question, and I think I can open it up to anybody, but the question is around how technology was incorporated into the program to ensure continued sharing and learning between parents and children. So I think the question is for the PSI team, but I would welcome insights from our other panelists from either this work or other work to talk about that. I think many SBC programs look to technology or mHealth types of interventions or web-based interventions to do this. So I would like to hear from the participants about incorporation of technology to continue sharing and learning between parents and children. Martha, your hand is up, so I'll pass it to you first.
Claudia Vondrasek, who is our very esteemed partner from Breakthrough Action, is also among the audience. And so I just wanted to provide the context that this particular study was conducted alongside an evaluation of Breakthrough Action's Merci Monero campaign, which precisely uses social media as one of the many platforms for disseminating videos and messages that are promoting empathy from adults to young people and helping them in the situation and helping break taboos. So this is a particularly, I think, pertinent example. We have a bunch of resources that we can post the links to in the chat. But this is one of the uses, I think, very contemporary example of use of technology to try to advance this goal of promoting intergenerational communication. Thanks.
I could just say briefly to that question that technology wasn't a specific focus of our study, but it did come up a lot in our discussion groups. The girls talked about using digital technologies. And so, we put forward a set of recommendations based on our findings. And one of those was to really kind of explore further the use of digital technologies to reach girls with information And, you know, an advantage being that, you know, they can be accessed with this confidentiality and privacy that was really, really critical issues for girls in communicating about these subjects. So super important.
Thank you both. One question, if I may take the facilitator's prerogative and ask as a follow-up is, do you feel, or do you find that there are any gender differences in access to technology around sexual and reproductive health, or these resources in the work that you both were mentioning? So are men and both mothers and fathers, you know, adults as well as young people, do you think have similar, and as well as young people have similar access to technology?
My impression was no. My impression was that it's the girls that are starting to have access, but I don't think that older generation does as much yet. But again, this was an explicit focus, so I'm interested in what others found in their studies.
So I would have to lean on the other work that we're doing as part of the evaluation for the Merci Monero, and it's very clearly one of the things that we did was do social listening and social media monitoring as part of one of the evaluation strategies. And there, you know, social media particularly leans young, leans male, and leans urban. So it's a very particular group of people that are being reached through that platform. Of course, technology that isn't limited to social media, but it's a consideration, I think, when you're looking at different platforms, who are the people that are on that platform and whose voices will be represented when you're using that as a source of data for research and evaluation.
Great, thank you. Let me go to, there's two other questions that have come in, and I think they're related. The question is asking, what are the recommendations that you can offer us for young teenagers, especially girls? And there's a question on intergenerational communication with boys. And so I think if our panelists could respond to that, what can you tell us about, I guess, reaching very young girls? And then what about boys? Where are they in this mix?
No.
So concerning Benin, I think that we should listen to the target audience. When we were working on our survey in the beginning, we asked the girls, do you want your mothers to speak to you about the sexual questions? They say, no, I don't want my mother to speak with me about that. The solution is that they said that the solution is that we should find a third person to speak about these subjects with that aren't related to these girls to speak about these subjects. So we should think about that in order to build on on this. So we need to find somebody who could speak more easily to these young girls about these taboo questions. And we don't want to force these girls to communicate on these subjects with the people they don't want to speak with about these subjects. So these are the aspirations of the target, and it could be very useful to use that information in future programs. Thank you. I would like to add in this context the access to the information for the young girls and the young boys, because in our study the girls are obliged cannot access to these informations in meetings because they fear their parents, and they fear the shame having information about sexuality or attending meetings about these things. So they need to have access to more detailed information about these, and so the freedom that is given to parents are not given to the young girls. So the equal access to information for young people and adults is different. So we need to ameliorate that and make the access to information more equal. And I think this is important in terms of reproductive health.
I think I would just add to what Clément said in that, you know, we found there was a theme throughout all of our discussions, and we were focused specifically more on the girls and their family planning and sexual reproductive health, but there was a theme throughout all of our discussions that the issues for a lot of the girls stemmed not from what was being communicated, but from the lack of communication, you know, and this norms of silence, and that those affected the boys equally as much, that they also often didn't have that information, was kind of a theme of the discussions.
Absolutely a theme in our study as well. I mentioned very briefly, I think in one of my previous responses, one of the findings was the sentiment of fear and shame, and that needing to be addressed specifically in programming. Both fear and shame, what we've found in the study, and I think the literature supports this, is that are sentiments that can be extremely paralyzing. So one of the options is building a sense of community, a sense of, you know, you're not alone in this, where, you know, even myself as a parent, we're all navigating this very scary path together. And so maybe one of the ways of doing this is giving creating a community around this is something that we recognize as beneficial. We also recognize it's hard and it's scary, but we can do this together. It's something that I think is worth exploring.
Thank you, Martha. And I certainly share, as mom to a teenager, I share those sentiments with you. I think what the webinar has certainly underscored is that there are really complex dynamics in intergenerational communication, where children, young people, and parents need both of them need knowledge and skills, but also sort of the ability to communicate, and that, as you said, the kind of supportive environment for that discussion. What we hope is that through this webinar, we have excited you all to sort of reconsider intergenerational communication in your SBC programs. We will be sharing these recordings as well as some out, and the recording of the webinar out, and the slides out afterwards. We encourage you to contact the panelists to hear more about their work, and reach out to the organizations to hear more about their work. And I think let's keep working on this. Thank you very much to everybody for being here today, being available, giving us your time. And I would like to close the webinar with this. Thank you very much.